Good evening. We're excited to have you all join us again for part 2 of our virtual Learn to Hunt Turkey class offered by the Iowa DNR and the National Wild Turkey Federation. We're excited tonight to have our panelists back from last week. We do have an addition with our Law Enforcement Bureau this week, so we're excited to have him. Panelists, if you want to, you can go ahead and start your camera so we can make introductions. But we're super excited to have everybody tonight. Tonight's really going to be more of an informal setting. There's going to be some slides and some other things that make it into the presentation. But overall, we want tonight to be really conversational. So for you all that are joining us, we're going to walk you through how to use the question and answer feature. I'll spend some time going over that in just a second. But first, let's introduce our panelists. Tonight, coming back for more is Jim Coffey. He's with the Iowa DNR. Jim will be with us tonight talking all things turkey. He's a member of our Wildlife Bureau here in the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. We also have with us tonight Grant Jelly. He is one of our conservation officers. He's over on the western third of the state, and he'll be here to answer any sort of regulation question that you may have. They're sure to come up tonight with the topics that we're planning to covering. And then again, Matt Smith with the National Wild Turkey Federation is with us tonight. And we're really excited to have these gentlemen with us, and it's going to be a fun, exciting night of all things turkey. Before we get going, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you all are tuning in on Zoom, if you'll take your mouse and take your hand down and use your mouse to go across your screen, there should be a panel toolbar that comes up along the bottom of your screen. You will see an icon that says Q&A. That is where we would like for you all to type in and send your questions to us. We're going to make sure those questions are getting answered both live and behind the scenes so that you're getting the information that you need. Our hope is that you all are feeling equipped and ready to get out and maybe try turkey hunting for the first time this spring. Looks to be a pretty promising season, and it's just around the corner. So make sure that you take the time to send us your questions tonight. And again, keep in mind that it's going to be very informal. We want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to chime in and talk, and hopefully it's going to, again, be pretty fun. So again, why do we do these classes? It's pretty easy. At the Iowa DNR and a lot of our NGO partners like NWTF and Pheasants Forever, we can't do what we do without conservationists, men and women taking to the fields, taking to the water to get out and enjoy all of Iowa's natural resources. Whether it's turkey hunting, deer hunting, pheasant hunting, fishing, trout fishing, even riding your ATV and your snowmobile, all of that work, all of that conservation, all those resources are managed by departments like the Iowa DNR. And it's crucial that those registration fees, your licenses are paid, and that you're observing the proper regulations and laws here in the state. And we put that out there because we are seeing fewer and fewer people over time getting into those activities. And so this effort is to try to get more people out turkey hunting this spring. So hopefully we'll see more of you all out in the woods and fields this spring as a result of taking this class. So with that being said, gentlemen, I'm going to turn it over to you all to talk through some things tonight. Jim, we've got calling, we've got strategies, we've got blind placement. Where do you want to start? I'll leave it up to you all. Jim, I think you're muted.
I was. There you go. Old technology, new technology, old man. So again, thanks, Jamie, for putting this together. And what I'd like to do with the guests that are with us tonight is kind of talk to you a little bit about the fact that this second night has traditionally been the night where we see people that come in with a little more confused look on your face. The first night, we talked a lot of biology and about turkeys and about the rules and regulations. And tonight, we tend to get the people going, well, what happens if this happens? Or this has happened to me in the past, or what would you do? So we're going to talk a little bit. I'm going to show a few slides about some basic things about calling, because calling tends to be one of the areas that we get the most questions in. And again, like Jamie said, it's going to be very informal. If you got questions, type them in. If I get rid of my slides, we'll try to get those answered live. And then we want you to be asking us those questions that you want, or those scenarios that you really have questions about. The thing that we're going to talk about probably the most is the fact that, make sure this screen comes up as shared. I assume it is.
Looking good, Jim.
You give me a thumbs up. Okay.
Yeah.
What we really want to talk about tonight is this is the part of turkey hunting that gets real serious. Is we actually want to do more than just go sit in the woods. We want to try to get a turkey up close enough so that we get a chance to harvest it. And we talked about a little bit in the first class, and hopefully most of you were at that one, is the fact that turkey hunting can take you from the highest highs to the lowest lows in the same day. And what we find out is that it's all about your confidence. It's all about feeling comfortable and realizing that, you know, we all make mistakes, but how do we minimize those mistakes? And then some days you can do everything right and it's still not going to work. So we want to go through those kind of things and talk about those things specifically. I'll try to show you some of these live here in a little bit. I don't know how well it'll work on camera, but it really comes to calls. And turkey calls are very unique in the fact that there's a lot of different kinds of calls. If we watch a lot of videos or we go to seminars and stuff, we see most of the people using the mouth or the diaphragm call. That would be one of the calls in the air category. We're using air to make the noises. The calls on the top would typically be called the friction calls. And on your left, you have what's called the pot call or the slate call. And that's the striker and a slate, and you rub it in a circular fashion to make the calls of the turkey. Very traditional, very good. Great times to use it or be in some wet conditions or really windy conditions when you want that volume to carry a little bit farther. But it has a lot of subtleties to it too. You can make it very soft. You can purr on it. You can make other calls on it, which makes it a very versatile call. And the box call is probably one of the most realistic calls that's out there, especially a cedar box. Sounds very much like a real turkey, but very susceptible to wet conditions. Not going to work well on a rainy day unless you've got a synthetic one. So it has its issues. The problem with all your friction calls is you are literally rubbing two surfaces together to make the noise. And what we learned last week is that turkey's eyesight is about 3 times better than yours and mine. So anytime we're moving, we're giving up our location, and they can hear, they can pinpoint us where we're at. So they're already looking at us. They've found us with their ears. So you have some issues of when you can use that friction call because of the movement involved. And in some cases, they may see you and run away because they did see that movement. So that's why you'll see a lot of people start to move to the mouth calls. Because you're going to make that control that air with your mouth so they don't see you moving your hands. And if you think about that, where are your hands probably most likely supposed to be at? They're going to be on your gun. If you're using a friction call, which works very well, but that turkey's getting in close to range, now you've got to put a call down and pick your gun up. And that's more additional movement. So you've got to learn when you're going to do that and how you're going to get that done. So again, we'll talk about each one of these calls hopefully when the video goes off. And if you've got questions, we'll go through those as we do it. On the bottom right, I always like to bring it up. I don't see many people ever use that, but there are suction calls or called turpin calls. And that was actually made out of the wing bones of a harvested turkey. And that's an old tradition that the Indians used to use, is they would take those 3 wing bones out of the wing of a bird. They're hollow, of course, and often referred to as a trumpet call. But instead of blowing into it, you're actually sucking on it like a straw, and it'll make a sound that sounds like a hen turkey yelping. So when it comes to basic calling, we want to remember that the number one fact is that the male is gobbling, and he's trying to attract us to him. But as a hen, we're going to be making those same calls as a wild hen, trying to attract him to us. So that, again, is the most difficult part of turkey hunting, is who gives up first. The hen's supposed to go to the male, but we want the male to come to us. And in some cases, he won't come to us, and then we get frustrated and we leave. And that can be detrimental to us. We don't want to leave at the wrong time. you have to remember when you're calling hens that you might actually call in other hens. And a lot of times the hens are moving through the brush or through the undergrowth very quietly and methodically. And they're always looking for another hen because they want to be social. So when you're focusing on that male, you can't get so much tunnel vision that you don't forget that there could be other turkeys around you. And if they see you, they're going to put up a put, which is an alarm call, and to warn the other turkeys that something's not right, and they're going to run away. There's times when you're going to be calling as a hen, and you're going to get another hen that's going to call right back at you. And she's going to call really hard, and she's just going to let you know that you're not welcome in her woods. And oftentimes we call that the boss hen. She doesn't like any other lady trying to be a hen or a lady on her ridge or on her woods. And she just lets you know she's in charge. And there's times as you turkey hunt that you'll actually use her to your advantage. Grant can talk about it. There's a reason why you can't use live decoys. It's illegal to use live turkeys as a decoy. And part of that reason is because it works. Hens are attracted to other hens. Gobblers will move over if they see those hens. And so you can't use live turkeys as a decoy. But nothing says that one walking through the woods that's wild can't be used. And in many cases, we'll often, and Matt will talk about it, is we'll talk about using actual imitation or decoys to imitate a live turkey out there. So when you can call aggressively to that boss hen, sometimes you're better off just letting her make all the noise and attracting that gobbler as well. And again, those young turkeys, they like to be around other turkeys. They don't have a confidence. And so if you're calling, you may call in several young hens or even some young jakes towards your position. And you have to be careful because a lot of turkey hunters have been busted by turkeys that they never saw, that were turkeys just sneaking in. So each call that a turkey makes actually has a little bit of a different social meaning. And there's been about 27 different calls discovered by biologists and researchers through the years. And by no means do we need to know what all 27 of those calls are, and we're not even going to talk about them tonight. As a turkey hunter that needs to have confidence, or as a new turkey hunter that's just starting out, you need to know 3 calls. And these 3 calls will kill turkeys year in and year out. And you don't even have to be that good at them. Matt and I were talking before the series started tonight, and I added a little thing to our slide down there. The worst caller in the woods is an actual live wild turkey. They never sound the same. They squeak. They step on themselves when they're making notes. It's almost hilarious sometimes when you hear them to think, well, that's got to be a new hunter because it sounds so bad. And then you'll see a hen walk by and you realize it was her the whole time. So from a confidence standpoint, you have to realize that even if you don't think you sound like a video or like the world champion, you sound just as good as that wild turkey that's out there. So the cluck is a very simple call. It's usually a single note or just a few little simple notes. It is kind of an attention-getting call. It's just something like, I don't want to be known too much, but I want you to know I'm over here, or I might be looking for you. I'm not sure where you're at. And so hopefully these audios will come through on your end. Again, just very simple, short notes, just a turkey that might be kind of by itself in the woods, and it's just clucking every once in a while, probably by itself, but just to let other turkeys know that it's around. The one that we probably use the most when we're actually trying to call in turkeys to harvest them is the yelp. And again, we're taking advantage of the fact that turkeys want to be social. They want to be around each other. And in some cases where the hen is trying to find that gobbler, because remember, she's going to him, is she'll yelp to let him know, I'm over here. And he'll usually try to gobble back to say, you're right, I'm over here and you're over there and we need to get together. So now when we start to yelp, if that gobbler gobbles right back at us, we know he has heard us. And now you have the decision of, okay, he knows the direction we are and he knows how far we are. Am I ready if he decides to come in? The yelp is usually a series of 3, 3, 5, 3, 5, 7 of soft notes that are often referred to as the word key, like a house key, and yolk like the yolk of an egg. Key, yolk, 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 yolk. So we'll play it here. I get it to go. Nope, it's not wanting to play for me. We'll see how something's held up here. We'll give it a second to see if it catches up. And I have to apologize. We've had some internet issues today down here at the office. So when we get into the actual calling portion or show you, we'll go through these again as well. And while this isn't working, I'll let it try to catch up. They may have to, I'm going to stop sharing for a second and reload it and see if that helps or let it catch up. It says it's not catching up there either. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, we can, Jim.
Okay, thank you, Megan, because now my computer's locking up on my end. So I'll just kind of keep talking while I wait for that to come back. Do you have any questions coming in yet that we might be able to answer or from YouTube or? So most people are going to get hung up on the calling portion of it. And so if my PowerPoint comes back, we'll continue through is the fact that, again, calling is a confidence issue. And right now is when you need to be practicing. And you're going to drive your spouse or your kids or your dog crazy practicing your turkey calling. But we're really working on our confidence. If you go out to the National Wild Turkey Federation website, they've got the same audio that I've shown you here, plus a lot more that are actual wild turkey recordings that you can download.
Hey, Jim, do you want me to do some calling while you're describing it?
Yeah, if you want to, that'd be great because my PowerPoint's locked up. I'm going to reboot it here.
We do have a question that just popped in here too,
Okay.
Gentlemen. First question is, does it matter what kind of call is used in the early morning hours?
So again, of the three calls that we described there, the cluck, the purr, and the yelp, the one that's probably most used is going to be the yelp. And that's just a basic standard turkey call. But when it's really, really early in the morning, you'll hear what's called the tree yelp. And that's the turkeys waking up in the morning. And remember, they're roosting on the limbs of the tree. They may only be 2 or 3 feet apart or 2 or 3 yards apart from each other. So it's a very, very soft yelp. In fact, if you were sitting underneath of their tree, you could barely hear them calling. And it's something that they use to communicate, to tell themselves we're getting ready to fly down and start our day. So I usually start out my morning with just some very, very, very light yelps. But I don't like to start calling, especially if I know where I'm going to be hunting at, until I hear that gobbler make his first gobble of the day. I want to make sure he's up and awake before I start to do any calling at all. And you have to remember that as soon as you call, that turkey knows the direction you are and how far you are away from him. So you have to be ready at that point. You can't still be trying to get stuff together and put your gloves on and all that stuff. When you make your first call of the day, you've got to be prepared that he might be there in 2 minutes.
Well, good question or good answer there, Jim. One other question popped in here, and then we'll let Matt demonstrate that yelp call you were just talking about.
Okay.
How about using a call? And this may be a great question for Grant too. Can you use a call when you're scouting?
Absolutely.
Yep. There's nothing that says you can't go out into the woods and call any time of the year. But it's something as hunters that we tend to not want to do just because we think we're educating birds that's out there. And so when we're scouting for turkeys, we tend to use locator calls, which I'll talk about in a couple different slides here, more than the actual hen calls themselves. Okay, looks like my PowerPoint's back up here. There, Matt's got, that sounds like a slate call to me.
Yep.
I'm not looking at you anymore. So,
And
here would
Jim,
be-
just real quick,
yep.
I was going to say, I'm glad you mentioned that about the worst caller being the actual wild turkey hen, because I know I get out there and I tend to overthink everything. That's just a life rule for me as a person. But to just hear that advice about just get out there and call and not overthink it, I think was pretty great. So I know I'm encouraged about it.
Yep, and we've got a couple other points that we'll make right here at the later end of the slides that we're just going to kind of keep reiterating. So here's the actual wild turkey hen. Maybe we'll try it one more time. So did you notice how that kind of inflected up and down a little bit? It gets a little more, I don't say aggressive, but a little louder, and then you hear it fade away. She's probably got her head up and she's moving her head back and forth, letting those yelps out because she wants them to be heard across the landscape, because she's trying to get that gobbler or other hens to talk back to her. And so sometimes we'll talk about lost turkey calls or something that's a little more. I always say, to me, the yelp is, hey, I'm over here. I'm over here. I want you to come find me, is kind of how I think in the human terms of what that yelp is. So again, that cluck is just like, I'm okay. No problem. I just want to know where you're at. You know, I'm just a turkey. I'm walking through the woods. Life's okay, but it'd be cool if I was with some other turkeys. But when we get to the yelp, it's more like, hey, I'm over here. I'm over here. Let's get together. And so then what I always throw the purr into, the purr is a very content call. That's a call when turkeys are really seeing each other. They're very close to each other. There's no reason to be loud. And it makes them very, very protected, I guess is a good word to use. They just don't care much because everybody's content. And and I'll play that here right now. And you might have to turn your microphone up because it's pretty soft. So there may be a half a dozen turkeys together. We can see each other. We're just purring. That's a call that I might switch to when that gobbler's down to within like 50 yards. You know, he's already looking for me. He can't find me. He doesn't know why he can't find me, but I'm purring and he hears that. And he's like, man, I got to be close. She's got to be right there. Why can't I see her? I'll just take a couple more steps because she's right there. And so hopefully that's really one of the last sounds he hears before he hears the safety go off of the gun. But those would be the three calls that I would recommend that everybody practices. And then you can look at the other calls that are out there and work from there as to what you think gives you more confidence. But if you can work on those three, that's all you really need to do. We talked just a little bit about scouting in that question. And so I never call like a hen turkey if I'm going out and scouting. Most of the time when I'm scouting, I'm actually want to do it in different times of the turkey season. I mean, I'm even scouting turkeys in the fall. I want to be looking for scratched up leaves, turkey droppings, turkey feathers, all those things. But when it's getting to the springtime and I actually want to know where a turkey's at on a ridge, we're going to go to what are called locator calls. And one of the problems that a wild turkey male has is he has to be the biggest, loudest thing in the woods. He cannot let something else be louder than him. So we use that to our advantage as hunters by sounding like something else in the woods. And in many cases, the barred owl is a great call. And that's the who cooks for you all sound. And of course, owls tend to be active at night or early morning hours. When a turkey hears that, he wants to gobble. And it's just so hilarious that this owl, makes his call and a turkey's got to gobble back to it. Well, we can use something like that locator call, that owl call on the bottom there, and simulate that owl call, and he'll gobble back and he'll give up his location. And we'll know, do we need to get closer? Is he on the roost? Is he on this ridge or the ridge across the river? At the same time, there's a lot of owl calls in the woods in the springtime that are not owls. And so you're hearing lots of people using owl calls. But you can use something like a crow call, which is a little, usually you think about using a little later in the day because the crows are out in the sunshine versus the owls. And again, when you use that crow call, that turkey cannot resist many times gobbling back to that. But I've seen people in Iowa use elk calls, pileated woodpecker calls. And we used to joke in the old days, we used the Southern Iowa call is you just slam your car door. When you slam that car door and made that noise, those turkeys will gobble back to us. And they're giving up that location. And that's what we want when we're scouting is where are they at? So a couple of other things I'll point out real quick before we move on is, of course, the toms are going to gobble. The jakes are going to try to gobble, but remember, they're teenagers. So think about a teenage boy. When his voice goes from a tenor to a bass, it's cracking and going back and forth. So oftentimes when the jakes gobble, it'll be a sound that jumps around. It's not complete and full. So sometimes you can tell that jake sound or that jake gobble bird because he can't quite gobble correctly. But we're using that gobble for him to give up his location so we can figure out what we want to do. A sound that a lot of people have trouble hearing is called the spitting drum. And that's a sound that wild turkey makes when he's going into that full strut. He's puffing up his chest, he's puffing up his feathers. And that drum is a very low-pitched noise that actually penetrates through the woods quite a distance. And other turkeys can feel that and hear that. Well, as a hunter, when you start to feel that drum, you know that turkey is really, really close to you. And in many cases, it's so close you shouldn't be moving because he's probably seen you by that point. But here's a typical wild turkey gobble. And you hear the hens in there and you hear some other gobblers in the background because when one turkey gobbles, that means the other turkeys are saying, hey, you're not louder than me. I'm the loudest thing in the woods. And they're going to try to gobble back. So you're going to get sometimes multiple gobbles going on at the same time or down a ridge as one turkey gobbles, another turkey gobbles on farther down. So again, the number one rule of turkey calling is confidence, confidence, confidence. And there are days when you will have zero confidence, but you just have to remember that confidence is the name of the game when it comes to turkey hunting. You got to know your gun, you got to know the range of your weapon, all those things go into place and they all add to your confidence. And all I can say is probably one of the worst problems that turkey hunters have is they are not patient. This is a patient sport. We want to get up, we want to move, we want to get around. But what we have to remember is that when you make that call, that again, that gobbler, if he's around, he knows the direction you are and how far you are. What you don't know is how long it's going to take him to get to you. And so what I was taught when I was a kid is anytime you make a call, like a hen turkey, you have to make the assumption that a gobbler will be coming. And you should not move for at least 30 minutes after you make that call. And Matt can attest to this because we've all done it, is we'll make a call, we'll move down the ridge, and an hour later, we'll come back and look at where we were at before, and there'll be a turkey standing there. They will get there eventually if they're around. It's just you have to be patient. When they get close, your heart's going to pound like it's never pounded before. You're going to breathe as hard as you can breathe. And you just got to remember, you've practiced, you got to calm down, that this is an intimate sport, and that's the whole purpose, is to get that bird in there as close as you can.
Hey, Jim.
Biggest mistakes we make? Yep.
I was just gonna, there's
Go
a
ahead,
couple
Jamie.
of questions. Yeah, there's a couple of questions that hopped in here and I thought we'd go ahead and get them answered.
Sure.
I think you already talked about how often do you call? You said 30 minutes, so that one's been taken care of. But what about range with these turkeys? How far can they hear a yelp call?
Yep. So that's kind of what I was going to get to right here, right now. Is you have, this is like my last slide, I think. You have to realize they've got tremendous hearing. And they, again, like we talked about last week, this is their home court. They know where the creek is. They know where the fence is. They know how to get down a ridge. And we as turkey hunters tend to think if I call and he doesn't gobble back to me, well, he didn't hear me. So I got to call louder, and I got to call louder yet until he responds. And I hope I don't offend any women in the audience here tonight, but the more my wife hollers at me to take the garbage out and the louder she hollers, where do you think I want to go? You know, it's usually to the basement or the garage. He's gobbling to let them know where he is, and they're supposed to come to him. He has no reason, if they get louder and louder, that he should say, okay, it's time for me to go to them. This is a dance. We want to shrug him off a little bit, make him wonder why we're not coming to him, and he's got to get closer. So that leads right into the fact that we call too often as turkey hunters. And I am just as guilty as anybody on this. I cannot handle it when I call. I want to hear a gobbler gobble back. And when he does, I want to call again because I want to hear him call back again. And I have to show a lot of self-restraint not to call, because the more you call to that gobbler, he now says, well, she knows where I'm in. I'm just going to dig my feet in here and wait for her to come to me. But if you can hold off and not call every time you think you could, he's going to start to say, well, how come she's not coming to me? Does she have another male over there with her? Or is the ridge better over there than it is over here? And now you're playing mind games with him. So one of those standard rules that I go by is if you think it's time to call, don't. Sounds silly, but every time you say, I think I need to make a call, don't. And you've got to wait, and you've got to tell yourself not to call again. And eventually you will call, but you'll cut your calling in half, and that will be a benefit to you. The same thing with the loudness. If you think, man, I'm not calling loud enough, I got to call louder. Whatever you're calling at, call half as loud. Call as lightly as you can. The key is getting close enough to that bird. He can hear you. Again, it's trying to make him strain a little bit. It's trying to make him think, why do I need to go over there? And then that last thing again is that leave too soon. When you call, he knows where you're at. It's just he hasn't decided to come yet. If you call and then say, oh, I need to go down the ridge another 200 yards, you can't do that. You got to wait a good 30 minutes. And that's the beauty of him gobbling, is he tells you where he's at. But if he gets quiet, you're calling, he gobbles back, and then he doesn't gobble again, you got to make the assumption he's coming towards you. And if you stand up, you're going to make movement, and he's going to run away. So again, it's a big, big mind game is what it is. And the question really is are you ready? And the way you get ready is you practice, 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 and you get your confidence up. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Hopefully we got some more questions, and Matt can get in there and show us a few calls. And I've got a few calls if we got what people that want to go through that. Most of us start out with box calls. That tends to be something that's a pretty easy call to learn how to use. But eventually you're probably going to get to a mouth call. And I know Matt's got all kinds of calls.
Yeah, at this point, guys, we don't have any questions. So I say just keep rolling with the calls. Yep.
Why don't you show us your different calls, Matt?
All right, let's start out, like I said, Jim said, the box call. This is probably one of the oldest calls out there. They're awesome for getting the sound out long distance. They're a very loud call. You can do them quietly, but they're it's just a matter of moving the paddle across. It's a lot of times there are two different kinds of woods. It's a chamber that when this rubs across it, it makes a noise like a turkey makes. You can do clucks with it. Or, you know, the thing that these are awesome, like I say, when you're trying to locate sometimes, like I say, when you're going out and you are in a large area you haven't hunted before, or you're not sure where the turkeys are, these things pierce through and go against the wind and make a loud noise that can be heard a long distance away. So these are great when you're first trying to figure out where you're going to go to try to pursue a turkey. The problem I have with carrying one of these is a lot of times they make a noise if you don't want them to. If you've got them in your vest and you bump something, sometimes they make a noise or an odd, weird noise you don't want them to make. So I used to carry a box call all the time, and I've kind of shied away from that because I have a tendency to be a klutz. and I'll bump and do things I don't want to do. So these are a great call if you've got, you know, room to sit down and sit out and get it to. It's great for distance, but when I'm actually hunting, I very rarely use this. That's just my personal preference. A lot of people love them. That's all they want to use. The next category Jim talking about is, you know, these pot calls. The surface is made from a lot of different things. This particular one's a crystal. There's slate. There's all kinds of different surfaces, but and the strikers can be different. This particular one is a rosewood. This crystal, this rosewood striker, the ones I use most of the time. But there's carbon, which got a little higher pitch. There's plastics, all different kinds of plastics, and some of them got, you know, different shapes that kind of help the sound out. Every kind of wood has a little different sound. So it's like, I carry a lot of this stuff with me, but I hardly ever use it. The ones I use typically are this particular crystal. I've got this one's slate and this rosewood. And I think the reason I like these best, it's kind of a rich tone and I can purr with it. You know, of course, it's not going to work for me now. All of these calls, when you buy them, they're nice and smooth and they look really nice. And the first thing you're going to need to do is rough them up and destroy the way they look. There's one of the things you can buy has got a stone on it where you can rub and put. What you're actually doing is put little ridges in the surface, and then you want to use your striker the opposite direction. So you're going to scratch it one direction. You actually want to scratch, use your call the opposite direction. There's when you buy a call, a lot of times it comes with a little scratch pads, like a little SOS pad. These are the things you like say you scratch across it one direction, and then you're gonna use your striker the opposite direction. That's how you make your sound on these calls. The other type of call is a diaphragm call. And this is like one of the hardest ones to learn to use, but once you learn to use it, it's awesome because then your hands are free. Or like I bow hunt, so my preference is I go sit up in a blind because you have to. With shotgun hunting, you're typically sitting down in the open next to a tree or against a tree. With archery hunting, you have to draw your bow back, and because turkeys pick up every single movement, you want to be in usually I use a pop-up blind. That's how typically archery hunters are turkey hunting. But the diaphragm call, it's a little horseshoe shape. Neoprene, or so it's got little rubber. I can't what you call it. That you put it. It looks like it go this way in your mouth. It's actually opposite. You want to put the rounded part to the back of your mouth. You hold it up against the roof of your mouth, and you're just putting air across your tongue to try and make a sound. There's a lot of really nice, awesome YouTube videos. All the different manufacturers of these calls put out videos. I'd encourage you to go out and look and listen to how different people tell you how to use it, because everybody has their own way, and you have to kind of find your own way. These calls are phenomenal, but like Jim mentioned earlier, will drive your family nuts. You don't want to do them when you're around anybody. What I used to do is when I was driving to and from work, that's when I would typically practice my calls, because actually your dogs will hate you, and so will the rest of your family. You're making these noises around the house. But you hold it against the roof of your mouth and just put air across your tongue. And when I first started calling, it sounded horrible. And I'd go out in the turkey woods, and then, like I said, here's somebody that's sounded worse than me. I was like, well, that sounded really seems very good. And sure enough, it'd actually be a hen would walk out. So you don't have to be that good. Beauty's in the eyes of the beholder, just like sound is in the eye, in the ears of a turkey. Turkeys are drawn to a lot of times a different sound. If you sound like the perfect hen, that might be, they're all listed for different things. And when these toms get jacked up, it doesn't take much. It's just a little bit of sound will draw them in. And I guess that's the other thing about calling. The biggest mistake people make, I think, is calling too much. When I go out, I typically use my crystal with this striker. And when I first get out, I usually wait, like Jim had mentioned, I wait till I hear a turkey gobble. If you're in a place, if you've done your scouting, you've done your homework, you know turkeys in the area, I typically try to be completely set up an hour before legal shooting light, which is actually an hour and a half before sunrise. And you go into the dark and you get set up, and it's completely quiet. And the turkey words start waking up. And it's actually one of the most amazing, wonderful experiences. Whether you see or shoot a turkey is irrelevant. Just that experience is amazing. It's one of my favorite things about turkey hunting is the spring woods are awesome. And when you're out there, you'll hear a bird call. It's very faint. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, within about 10 or 15 minutes, the whole woods wake up. And as that's happening, sure enough, you have a turkey that'll gobble off the distance. And when you hear that first gobble, what I'll typically do is just give a couple of quick clucks. And that might be it. Just one, and if they gobble back, that tom knows where you are. I've gotten up and pursued, went after it. Sounds like, okay, I yank you with the other direction and come back. And I've seen the turkey wander around the tree I was leaning against. They know exactly where you are. Just from that one time when they gobble back, they know where you are. And like Jim mentioned, it's a sport of patience. You really need to just stay put. Typically what turkeys do when they roost, the toms will roost near the hens. They spend all day together and they're doing this dance. Like I say, they're breeding, they're living together. And when the hens fly up and the toms fly up, they're all kind of together. And what'll happen is whatever direction you are, especially if you're calling a little bit, a lot of time the hens will try to draw that tom away from you because they see you as competition for them in breeding. So if you call too much, a lot of times you'll push them the other direction. But even without calling too much, sometimes, well, my luck is it always seems like they fly down the opposite direction, but that's okay. The toms and the hens are usually roost fairly close together, and those toms will fly down with the hens that they know they've been with, but they'll usually breed those within the first hour or so after dropping down out of the tree. And those toms then will start looking for their next hens to breed, and they will remember where you were. So my advice is call very sparingly and stay where you are. And maybe every 30 minutes, you just give a real quiet cluck or just a purr. And that's it. That's my most successful hunts have been being patient and very, very sparingly call. And a lot of times it's when you listen to the woods, I mimic what's going on in the timber I'm in. I've hunted timber where the turkeys are really loud and a lot of stuff going on. If that's happening, that's fine. You can call a little more. But my experience has been most of the time, turkeys they're verbalizing a little bit, very lightly in their groups, but it isn't like they're calling really loud all the time. And if you do that, I think that gives you away as, turkeys are thinking that doesn't sound like something normal. I don't think I want to go over there. So my experience has been call lightly, call sparingly, and try to mimic what's happening in the timber.
And hey, Matt, I've got some questions that have rolled in for you and Jim and maybe Grant too, and I'll try to address the ones that are calling related, and then we can maybe talk a little bit more about some of these others. So first question is, what about the use of gobble calls? If you all have any experience using those?
Well, personally, if you're in public ground, I would not recommend using a gobble call. There are a lot of hunters, inexperienced hunters who are going after turkey sounds. When they hunt, they actually listen for them and they'll go pursue a sound when they hear it, which as a turkey hunter, that's something you never should do. What you need to go and sit down, typically, we always taught you find a tree that's about the size of the width of your shoulders, and you lean back and you call and you try to get the turkeys to come to you. When you're following calls, you have the potential of going right into somebody else's setup. And a gobble call is a really awesome tool, but I would not recommend using it on public ground, only on private ground and sparingly, because you can have people come in and trespass on private ground as well.
The only time I've seen a gobble call really used is when you want to use that as a locator call. So again, if you're going out at night, that last half hour of sunlight as that turkey's getting ready to fly up to roost, you can use that gobble call again as a loud noise to get that gobbler that you're hunting to gobble back and give up his location. most nights I never do anything. I just stand on the ridge. He's going to gobble because he's trying to get those hens to let it know where he's at. So in 40 plus years of turkey hunting, I have never used a gobble call while I'm actually turkey hunting. I won't say that it doesn't work, but from a safety standpoint, I hunt all public land. It's not something that I'm going to do.
Thank you, guys. Next question about calls. This may be a good one for Grant to jump in here. What about using a call from your phone? It's recorded. Is that considered one of these electronic devices?
It is, Jamie, and that's actually something that's illegal and prohibited. So, yeah, you can't use any type of electronic device, whether it be something that comes from your phone or any other type of electronic caller that may be commercially manufactured. So, no, we have to stick to the old-fashioned way and use some of these calls that Jim and Matt have been talking about.
Good deal. Thanks, Grant. Next question here on calls, and then we could probably maybe guys start easing into some of the other topics here. So last call here, no pun intended on calls. I see a lot, the question comes in, I see a lot of different cuts for mouth calls. What is the difference, or is there a preference?
Yes and yes. And so that, again, in my mind, goes back to what gives you confidence. Originally, when turkey calls, mouth calls were first made, they were made with one piece of rubber or one diaphragm, and that's still a basic turkey call. But over the years, as people started to modify and change, they found split reeds and double reeds and triple reeds and quadruple reeds. And it's just adding more, in my mind, you're adding more and more levels of difficulty. So as a new turkey hunter that's trying to start to use a mouth call, you're going to have a hard time just keeping it in your mouth without gagging. You think you're going to swallow it, and you're not, but you think you're going to. I recommend for most people that they get what's called a double reed, no splits, no cuts, no spaces, just a double reed call. And what that does is that gives a nice stiff layer of rubber. And most turkey hunters or new turkey callers are going to try to push their tongue too hard against the roof of their mouth. And with a single reed, you're going to push so hard that it's not going to sound good at all. With a double reed, it gives you a little more wiggle room that if you push too hard, the sound's still going to be consistent. And that's what we want. And when I put a call in my mouth, I want to make one single tone. I want to be able to control my air. And what ends up happening with some of those more exotic calls is it becomes much more difficult to control your air. So yes, they do sound different. And on the packaging, they'll say raspy and extra raspy and old boss hen. And then you just have to practice with the one that you can control the air on, and the one that gives you the sound that you're looking for. But I would never start out with anything that's too exotic. I'd start out with a basic double reed call.
Great advice, Jim. All right, so let's, if you guys are up for it, let's talk a little bit about clothing. I know Matt went over this a little bit last week, but a couple of questions here to kick us off, and you all can talk a little bit about clothing. What about camo inside of the blind is the first one. And then how about the face masks that are kind of built in? Are those worth having for camouflage?
Matt, you've probably had them all.
Well, from inside of a blind, actually black is the best color to use in my experience inside a blind. The problem with that is that limits you to hunting in the blind all the time. So I typically wear camo. Most camo is dark enough that if you're sitting to the back of the blind, which is what I do when I'm bow hunting, you have an opening on that blind. And for me, I'm trying to draw a bow back, so I want to be far enough back that they still can't see that motion. If you're hunting a blind with a shotgun, typically what you're going to want to use is a shooting stick and some kind of a chair that gets you up enough. But as long as you're wearing camo, is fine. It's dark enough that they shouldn't be seeing much motion, but you definitely will still want to have a mask of some sort, netting or something covering your face, and especially your hands, because it seems like, if you're holding a shotgun and you have your hand out front, if it's not covered with something, they will see that in the blind. So you're going to want to have gloves of some sort. If it's warm out, you want to have some mesh. If it's colder out, you want, obviously, something's going to keep you warm. but you want to have face covering of some sort, even in the blind, in either black or camo. And the thing I like about camo is if something happens that you decide that, or you need to go out of the blind for some reason, you can still hunt and be, have your outline broke up. So
the beauty of a blind, and that kind of goes to Will's question too, with our season changes, is that the blind is really a great tool if you're having trouble controlling your motions. And Matt's alluded to that. As a bow hunter, that's a very difficult thing to do, is to draw that bow back and be able to move left and right at the right time. Well, if you're using that box call and you don't have confidence that you can put that box call down and raise your gun up, that concealment of the blind gives you that capability. The trade-off is that I'm stuck in the blind. I can't move. So I would agree 100% with Matt. I'm going to dress in my camouflage just like I didn't have a blind. And I'm going to then stay in my blind because that's going to conceal my movements. But those movements can be concealed with some sticks or some other things that break up your outline. The worst mistake most people make with using a blind is that they sit in the back, then they're looking at a little 1 foot by 1 foot window, and pretty soon they're creeping up and sticking their face out the hole so they can look left and right. And your face is shining. You might as well just be holding a flashlight out just with like a beacon. You've got to stay back in the shadows. The whole purpose is to conceal that movement and conceal your overall body shape. So yeah, blinds are fine. And I would just wear the normal camo that I would wear. And to Will's question, if you're going to hunt 4th season, what's really the big difference is it's the vegetation. The difference between 2nd season and 4th season Iowa could be the difference between no leaves and complete leaf out. And in 4th season, you're probably going to be concealed a little bit better and be able to get away with a little more movement. 1st and 2nd season Iowa, you better be able to control your movements, because there can be places where that turkey could see 100 or 200 yards down a ridge. But I've hunted 4 seasons where I've had turkeys 5 yards away from me and I can't see them. It's just too thick. And then that leads back to the safety issue. You're assuming it's a turkey 5 yards away from you, but what if it's not? What if it's another person or somebody walking by? So you've got to be able to identify. So yeah, a lot of differences happen in a month, and 4th season's a great time to hunt. And the leaves are changing. One thing I don't like about 4th season, especially that 3rd weekend, it's usually warming up and the mosquitoes are coming out. And if you can't control your movements, you're not going to be able to control your movements when the mosquitoes are biting you.
Kind of to dovetail on that, Jim, one of the things that I use, this is the one I use in blind. They make them though, you can sit out next to you. There's a thing called a thermocell, which has got a little pad that goes on the top of the thing, if I get this out. And it's a little butane cartridge goes on the bottom of it. This butane creates a little flame underneath this pad that, and like I say, we're not sponsoring, or these aren't sponsors, or we're not promoting any particular product, but this is something that I do use. This thermocell does an awesome job of keeping mosquitoes away. And you can set this down next to you and it makes like a 12-foot diameter area that does keep mosquitoes away. It doesn't work on biting flies, but if you want to keep mosquitoes at bay, thermocell is one of the best things out there. These are the butane refills. And like I said, there's a little blue pad that you put in the top. And it's just an itty bitty little flame that heats that up, and whatever it is that's on this pad keeps mosquitoes away.
Yeah. And that, again, it's back to your confidence. Because I've been swinging at mosquitoes and I'm convinced that a turkey saw me swinging at mosquitoes. So then I'll sit there and not swing at mosquitoes and I'll get bit like crazy. And you're trying to wiggle your nose to get them off of you. And so, again, you're messing with your own mind. Dan's got a good question there. And this is one that we often overlook. And Dan typed in, how long do you wait? If you shoot a bird, how long do you wait before you go get him? And so what we're really hoping is that we waited long enough that bird came in and we took a good, clean, ethical shot, and that bird should be dead. It should be stone dead where you shot it at. The part that we forget about is we're so worked up, our adrenaline levels working so high, is we want to jump up and run out there. And so a couple of things that I always like to bring up to people is, and I've had this happen with many people that I have taken out with me, is, what do we forget to do when we jump up and run out there? There's 2 things we always forget. One is we've been sitting down for about an hour and our legs are asleep, or they're not working properly. And you'll get about 3 yards up from your tree, or you're blind and you're running, and then all of a sudden your body realizes you left your legs back at the tree, and you'll fall flat on your face. The second thing you forgot to do is you're falling flat on your face with a loaded weapon that you forgot to put the safety back on when you shot. So as a new turkey hunter, what I've always told people to do is you're focused on shooting that bird, in that wattle area, in that lower neck area, open skin, is put that bead on that bird, pull that trigger, and if you've got a pump gun or it's an automatic, semi-automatic, cycle a shell in there and keep that bead right on that bird. If he's dead, he's dead. If he sticks his head up because you just knocked him down and he's looking around, you're going to shoot him a second time. You shouldn't have to, but you're going to be ready. But if you're up and running to that bird and he sticks his head up, you're in no position to shoot that bird again and kill it ethically. And it's going to run off, fly off, or flop off. So when I talk about that, I'm really talking about your safety. We don't want you running in the woods with legs that aren't working and a loaded weapon and tripping and falling to get a bird. And hopefully that bird's been close enough that when we shoot it, it's dead. The other thing we forget to talk about, we need to, is that when you shoot that bird, even if it is dead, it's going to go through what we call the dying flutters. It has this innate sense that a predator's trying to attack me. I'm full of adrenaline, run away. And if I can't run away, I'm going to fly away. So I'm going to start to flop, and I'm going to start to make my wings flutter. And that's that adrenaline rush kicking in. Well, we want to run out there and grab that bird, and we see it flopping. We think, oh, it's going to get away from us. And I've seen many people get injured from the spurs or even the wings coming back and hitting them in the face. So what I often tell people is, as you go out there, assess that bird. It should be dead, but walk up and put your foot across the neck of the bird. And when you put your foot across the neck of the bird, right in the arch of your foot, you're going to pin that bird to the ground. And then if it does go through the dying flutters, it's anchored at your foot. Lean back away from it. Let it go for about the 20 seconds that adrenaline rushes through its body, and then it's completely dead. So those are things you learn from being with other people, because we've all been flopped in the face. I saw a guy one time get hit, broke his glasses, and he was as blind as a bat without his glasses. You try finding your glasses in a hay field when they're in two pieces in April. It's difficult to do. Luckily, I was with him, and we found the second lens so he could walk out of the woods.
Jim, we've got another law question, it looks like, that popped up that I'll go ahead and jump on. Jose asked if shotguns need a chamber restrictor, which is commonly referred to as a plug. And the answer to that is no. They do not have to have a plug for turkey hunting in Iowa. The only species that we require a plug to be in your shotgun in Iowa is for migratory birds, ducks, geese, and as well as doves. So make sure that you are checking the regulations, obviously, and this is a great time to ask questions like that. But and I always tell people too, just because it's is or isn't a law in Iowa doesn't mean that that's the same way in Missouri or Nebraska. So if you travel to another state to hunt, make sure that you ask that same question there and brush up on those regulations.
I will throw myself under the bus on this one, Grant. I went down to Missouri for years, and I would go down and I'd be hunting Iowa, and I'd take my plug out after duck season and not worry about it till the next duck season. And I'm sitting out in the Missouri turkey woods going, oh crap, they require a plug in their gun, and I didn't have one. And a nice little piece of oak branch will work pretty good in a pinch shoved up in there. So yeah, you got to know the regulations of the state you're hunting in. Yeah. So I've even been caught on that one myself. The thing I would like to add to that too, though, is, again, I'll just keep saying it, and I hope it gets drilled in everybody's heads. This is an intimate sport. In reality, this is a one-shot game. And as turkey hunters, we've all been there. When we hear that boom, boom in the morning, we all feel a little sad, because we know there's a turkey hunter over the ridge that shot and missed, and then he shot a second time thinking that, well, I got to throw another one at him. And usually the second shot is the one that we know that it's been a bad day. So we shouldn't have to worry about having 4 or 5 shells in the gun. It really ought to be just one good one and maybe a backup if we need it.
We've had another regulation question pop up as well. And someone asked if turkey tags are specific to the county in Iowa. And the answer to that is no. Our turkey tags that we sell are good statewide. The only exception to that is if it's a non-resident tag, they are good for that particular zone that they're granted for. So, unlike our antlerless deer tags, where they are county specific, the turkey tags that we sell are good statewide.
And the only other kind of caveat would be a landowner tenant license. You would have to hunt on land that you're either own or that you're farming. So you could have land in a different county and hunt it, but that tag would only be good. A landowner tenant tag would only be good for land that you own or are farming. Yeah.
Starting to get a few more law questions pop in here, and we had another one ask, can my 9-year-old son come with me and participate in culling without a license? Technically, the answer to that would be that anybody who is participating in a hunt by culling would have to be properly licensed. So the answer to that one is he would have to be licensed. And let's just be real here. If you're sitting in a blind with your son and he's helping you or he's practicing with you and you're licensed, there's probably not a conservation officer on this planet that will give you a hard time for that, because you are teaching your son how to hunt. But it is something that we probably need to get in the habit of doing, because later in life, that's something that we do sometimes encounter, is that we check a couple hunters out there and one of them says, oh, I'm not from around here, I just came to call. Well, unfortunately, you are required to have a license to do that. So that is how the regulations read.
And the thing I would add to that too is just go with that definition of participating in the hunt, because we'll get lots of phone calls. Well, I just want to go with my buddy and film. Well, in reality, are you filming? Are you participating in the hunt? Most likely not. You shouldn't be carrying the gun. You shouldn't be calling. You shouldn't be doing things that's helping that person be successful. Filming is not probably going to make that person successful. So we typically would say, no, you don't need to have a license to go out and film with somebody, but you better not be seen carrying that turkey out of the woods or holding the gun if you don't have a license when you're out there, because then you would be participating.
And then finally, Jim, we could probably both touch on this one. And this is, I guess, not really necessarily a legal question, but a person asked, or Clay asked, how long or how much room should you give other hunters? Is the next ridge okay, or should you go a mile or so? By regulation standards, there is no distance that you have to give another hunter. However, ethically, as sportsmen, particularly if that person is calling to that bird first, or they were in that location first, I personally am going to pack up and go the other way if there's a turkey in their area. Now, there's nothing that requires you to do that, but for safety's sake and for just respect for the other hunter and respect for other hunters you may not know are out there, a great idea to probably go see if you can find another turkey.
We're all trying to harvest that turkey one-on-one, and we want to have that intimate relationship. I've walked away from many turkeys because I heard somebody else calling to it. And I want that person to have the same respect for me. I want them to think it's them and the bird, not them competing against me and who gets the bird first. There's plenty of other ridges. I'll go to the next ridge, or I'll go a mile away, or the other side of the property, whatever it means. But I don't need to be trying to pull a bird away from somebody or blatantly walk in front of somebody to get to a bird that I know they're trying to hunt, because I don't want anybody doing that to me. That's going to run a hunt 10 times faster than a hen cutting me off and taking that gobbler a different direction. That's nature. I can't control nature, but I can control how I act and the what I want to get out of that sport. So be respectful of your fellow hunters. You're going to bump into people occasionally. That just happens. But don't try to do it knowingly, and don't get in a competition with other hunters. The competition is between your ears. It's keeping your confidence up of, am I doing the right thing to fool Mother Nature to get that gobbler to come to me?
And we had another common question that I get asked a lot of times in regards to youth tags. If my 11-year-old grandson is not successful getting a turkey during youth season, can he hunt any of the other seasons? And the answer to that is yes. That is the greatest thing about our youth turkey tag is if that youth hunter is not successful during the youth season, that tag is then available to be used for the remaining 4 seasons. But here's the catch to that. I always tell people, make sure when buying that youth hunter, their tag, that it is purchased before youth season or before youth season ends, because once youth season ends, then that young hunter is restricted to buying a season just like an adult hunter would, either a first, second, third, or fourth season tag. So great idea to purchase that tag early. It gives you lots of flexibility, lots of options, lots of days that you can pick and choose, and you get so many more weekends you can take those kids out and hit those good weather days. So yeah, get those tags bought early.
I'm going to hop in here real quick. There's another question that just come in. I think it would be a good segue into maybe talking about, I know we talked about hunting from a blind in terms of clothing, but maybe placement, out in the open, kind of back in the woods. We'll get to that in just a second. But the question is, it's an etiquette question. Should you only hunt if the parking lot is empty? In other words, if someone beats you to the parking lot, are there any common ways or unspoken rules to understand where the hunters may be headed to? Or should you just move on?
So, I can answer that a lot of different ways, Clay. Yes, 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 and no, however you want to go. If there's someone else in a parking lot, I always try to have a plan B and a plan C and sometimes a plan D. Because if you're hunting the first weekend of second season, there's probably going to be somebody in the parking lot that you're going to if it's on public land. It's nice to have private land, but we don't all have that. So there's going to be times that you're going to be parked in the same parking lot, but you might have to adjust yourself. Many times I'll get to a parking lot a half an hour before I want to leave my vehicle to kind of wait to see if somebody else is going to come or not. And when they get out, I'll introduce myself and I'll say, hey, I'm Jim Coffey and I'm planning on hunting here today. And here's a copy of the map. And this is the ridge I'm planning on hunting on. Where were you planning on hunting on? And kind of get a game plan. And many times I'll use a hard feature like a creek and say, I tell you what, I'll hunt east of the creek, you hunt west of the creek. Good luck to you. But I'll let him know I'm not going to cross that creek. I don't want him worrying about me sneaking in on him. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario is you're going to go out there knowing there's somebody else in the woods. So now you got to be cautious. Does that person hear me? Do they know I'm here? If they're already in the woods, they don't know you showed up after them. So do I want to walk down a ridge or try to sneak in on a turkey that I don't know where that other person's at? You always got to assume there's somebody else in the woods, even on private property. And you can't let it ruin your hunt. But if you got a plan B, I'd go with the plan B if possible. I've hunted in Missouri with 15 cars in the parking lot before. It can be done. You just don't move much.
And a lot of times too, Jim, that depends on the size of the area that you're hunting.
Yep.
If it's a 40-acre piece and there's a car there, you might go to plan B. If it's a 1,500-acre piece, maybe you check out the other parking lots in the area, or just head in a different direction. But that definitely depends on the size of the area.
And you're going to start to do exactly what Grant said too, is I'm going to come in as a turkey hunter and say, man, if I was walking in, I'd probably go down this ridge or I'd go down that ridge. I hate to say this out loud, but I check license plates. If it's a local person, they might know the area a little bit better. They might say, oh, I'm going to park here, but sneak in there. But somebody that's new, especially maybe somebody's a non-resident, they might come in and walk right down the main ridge on the main path. I might make that assumption. Or when I'm walking in, I'm going to be looking for silhouettes like blinds that are set up and try to say, okay, and avoid those things. So you just got to use your best. Go ahead, Matt.
A lot of times you can listen for them calling.
Yep.
If you hear calling, you got to assume that that's another hunter, or it's a high likelihood that that's the direction how the hunter went. And then you can, if it's a big area, you can go the other direction.
Yeah. And then if you do run into somebody, we talked about it last week, is of course, if I'm sitting in a tree and I see Matt walk by, I don't wave my hands or yell at him. I just say, hey, hunter over here. If Matt's a conscientious hunter, he's going to turn and look at me, acknowledge that he sees me, and turn around and walk as quiet as he can the way that he just came from.
Yeah,
because he would hope I would do the same thing for him. And it does happen. But the last thing I'd like to say is, hey, have Matt turn around and look at me and give me the bird's eye and then keep walking right down the ridge. Because now I'm going to be upset all day, and that's not why we're out in the woods.
That's the only advantage of having decoys out when you're on public ground is I can't tell you how many times I've had hunters see my decoys and try to sneak up on them. I mean, it's and then, like I say, you definitely want to holler out and make sure that they know that you are there, because you don't want them coming and blasting your decoy or shooting your direction if you move.
One thing that I would laugh about that, though, Matt, is anybody that thinks they can sneak up on a wild turkey, if you can see a wild turkey, it can see you and it's going to run away.
Exactly. That should be your first clue that maybe this isn't an actual turkey, but a decoy.
Right. Yep.
We had a couple more questions come in from Dan, and we need to probably get it to you. One of them that Dan asked was, does a ground blind have to have an orange triangle on it? And the answer to that would be no. It certainly doesn't. However, maybe not a horrible idea when hunting public lands, but we don't have a regulation requirement for that. And then a question that he's had up for a while here that we haven't answered is, how long does a person wait before you go and get the bird when hit? And so I guess that definitely depends on the type of weapon you're using. If you're using archery equipment and the bird has been hit, then he kind of hobbles off, you might give him just a little bit of time before you go out and start looking for him. I got a funny story I got to tell about my wife from last year. I took her out on one of her first turkey hunts. We had a gobbler come into the decoy, and it was about 15 yards away. She shoots and blows feathers off of this turkey's breast, and the turkey was clearly hit, and he jumps up and he flies away. So she walks over and she says, well, now what? And I said, well, we probably messed that one up. I said, but let's go make a good effort to see if we can find it. So we spent probably 15 or 20 minutes, looking for that turkey in the direction that he flew. Didn't see any blood or any feathers or anything like that. We went and hunted for another hour or so. And pretty soon in that same field where she had shot that morning, we had a turkey gobbling about mid-morning. So we went back to that field, and I was set up behind her a ways calling, and we hear this turkey gobbling, and he's getting closer and closer. And, things are starting to get excited. All of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I look at the base of this cedar tree, and I see something black and white sitting there. And for the longest time, I thought, what the heck is that? And finally, the temptation just got to me. I pulled up my binoculars and I looked, and I see a turkey wing. And so at this time, I'm thinking, what the heck, is that just a random dead turkey, or is it the turkey that she shot this morning? So I looked a little bit longer, and I determined that it was a pretty fresh kill. So I crawl up to her while this live turkey's gobbling in, coming towards us. And I say, hey, dear, don't shoot this turkey that's coming. I said, I found your dead turkey. Sure enough, we go over there, and there's her first ever turkey laying at the base of this tree. And it had probably flown 200 yards. We couldn't hear it doing the flop or anything like that. But it just goes to show that they're pretty amazing critters, but you do have to really spend some time looking for them, no matter how poor of a hit you think you may have.
And that's happened many times, Grant. That's a great story. It's exactly, I was going to tell the story before. You said same thing with my brother-in-law one time. We called a bird in nice and close to us. He knew where to shoot, shot the bird, but the bird just made one of those little jig jogs right when he pulled the trigger, and he didn't hit it square, and it jumped up and it flew. And so he shoots again, like I talked about earlier. When you hear that second shot, it's not good. and the turkey proceeded to fly down through the timber, and he was mad, and he wanted to go home, and he wanted to chase it. Then he didn't know what he wanted to do. And I said, just be quiet. Just be quiet. That turkey, remember, turkeys like to run. They don't like to fly. And it jumped up in the air, and we could tell it was hit because it wasn't getting up very high. It was crashing through the limbs. It hit the ground, all those oak leaves. You could hear it running through the woods. And I finally got him to be quiet, and we stood there. And about 3 minutes later, about 150 yards down the ridge, I could hear flop, 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 flop. And it was the dying flutters. And I said, now we can go get it. And we walked down the ridge, and we looked, and we followed, and we spread ourselves out, and we looked. I said, it's going to be underneath of a down log. Look for some thick brush. And sure enough, we looked, and there was this old blowdown with about 6 inches of space underneath of it. And that turkey had tried to get underneath that, and then it had died, went through those dying flutters. So we used our woodsmanship skills, and we used our experience to find that bird. So it does happen. But what we really want is we want that good, clean, quick kill right at that site. And if you get that, you can sit down and have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich before you go out and pick it up. The only thing you have to do is put the tag on it before you move it at that point.
Good discussion, guys. I kind of want to bump on and make sure, did we have a chance to talk about decoys and maybe placement of those? Any advice there for that?
Yeah, I would let Matt talk about that, because in all honesty, I started turkey hunting before decoys were legal. And I personally find decoys to be a bigger hindrance to me than they are an asset. But people that hunt with them swear by them and love them. And I'll never say you can't hunt with them, but I just personally don't. So I'm not a good person to talk about placement.
Well, and the difference, Jim, for you and I is you typically hunt public ground, and I agree. A decoy on public ground is not the asset that it is on private ground. Turkeys that live on public hunting areas, they've got a lot more interaction with humans than turkeys are on private property. And one of the first things they learn is that something that looks like a turkey but it's not moving is probably not a turkey, and they avoid them. But if you're on private ground, decoys can be phenomenal. And some of the most exciting hunts I've had have been using decoys on private property. There's a lot of different strategies, and everyone you talk to is going to have a different idea on what's best or what's not. The one thing about turkeys is they're never consistent. You can have I've had the same tom react differently to turkeys at different times during the same day. So if you're going to be using decoy, typically one hen is fine. I mean, that's actually what I typically do when I do decide what decoy setup I'm going to use. I do a lot of scouting, and most of my scouting I do with binoculars from my vehicle from a long distance away. And one of the things I'm looking for is patterns, and I'm looking to see if you're seeing a lot of single birds and that's all you're seeing, or hens by themselves, then I would typically just use one hen decoy. If you're seeing groups of birds and 2 or 3 hens, then I would consider using multiple hens to try to match what I'm seeing. If I'm seeing nothing but groups of toms, I have a place where that's what I saw a couple of years ago is there's groups of 5 or 6 birds, and I actually have several tom decoys, and I've had really bad experience with tom decoys. A lot of times when an actual bird comes in, if he's had his backside kicked by other toms in the area, they'll shy away. They won't come in. But one of the best, absolute awesome setups can be a Jake decoy, which that's what this one is, and a hen. This one particular one is a breeding hen decoy. It doesn't have legs on it, just sits on the ground. And I'll typically set that up facing me with a Jake behind it. And what a tom thinks when he comes up on that is that there's this youngster is going to try to move in and breed one of the hens in his neck of the woods, and he's not going to have any part of that. And that's some of the most exciting hunts I've had, or when I've had that setup where I have a hen and a Jake behind it, and 2 or 3 toms come in and they will just beat the tar out of that decoy. I've been hunting for a long time, and one of the first decoys that came out were these really, really, really lightweight foam decoys. And they never look real to me, and they're kind of floppy, and they're inexpensive, which is great. But one of the things I learned at the our Connect Individuals class a couple weeks ago, one of our mentors had some old decoys like this, but they looked awesome. They actually were full, and these are awesome decoys if the shape's right. This, when they're flopping around, are not very realistic, and I can see why somebody would not want to use these. This is the same basic style decoy. So is this, but their shape is fantastic. And what one of our mentors did is he takes, everybody's got a bunch of these plastic bags. They're super lightweight, and they make these otherwise lifeless and horrible looking decoys look really, really good. So if you want to save some money, the avian decoys are fabulous. They're very realistic looking, but I honestly think that the attention to detail is way more about getting me as a turkey hunter to buy them. Turkeys have great eyesight and they see motion, but when they look at a decoy, typically it's probably more the outline that they're seeing. So as long as you've got a decoy that has the right shape, these inexpensive ones work fabulous. And by shoving them full of these plastic bags, you can take the least expensive decoys out there, save a lot of money, and have a very realistic decoy to use when you're out in the field. So that's been my take for this year. But my favorite thing is that somebody taught me that I can use these plastic bags and take these things I used to just leave, and I spent a whole lot of money to get nicer decoys in better shape. I could have saved some money and just show some plastic bags in these decoys. So that's I guess my best tip for this year that I learned is you can take the cheapest decoys and make them look awesome by shoving them full of plastic bags.
There's been a lot of evolution of decoys over the years, and I agree with things Matt said. Most of the times the turkeys are looking for the outline, and I'll take one step back. The beauty of turkey decoys, it's going to be that word that you hear us say over and over. It's confidence. When turkey decoys were first allowed, it gave people more confidence, because when that gobbler finally sees that hen that he thinks is calling to him, he becomes a little more laser focused. He's not using that periscopic head to look around and try to find that hen anymore. In many cases, he might have seen you sitting against that tree. Now he goes, okay, there's the hen over there. Now I just got to focus on her so she sees me. And that gives the hunter a little more confidence that I can move a little bit differently than I thought I might be able to. So I think of decoys as being a confidence builder for the hunter, as much more so than an attractant like waterfowl, where you're putting duck decoys out to attract turkeys to you. It's to get them kind of distracted from looking for the hunter.
And I think they do give the toms something to focus on, and it does make a difference. If they're strutting and they see the decoy, a lot of times they'll spin around trying to impress that decoy, thinking that's a hen. And when they're looking the other direction is the only time you can actually move with a little confidence, not being busted by that particular bird. Where I've had trouble is I'm so laser focused on that tom I'm thinking I'm going to shoot that I don't see his buddy over here who's the one that busts me every time that I move it. So,
absolutely. It can hurt you just as much because you forget about those other eyeballs that are looking for you. Another great use of a decoy, especially for people in blinds or people that are hunting field edges, is woodsmanship skill you need to practice is judging range. And standing at 6 feet tall looking at something, it looks different than sitting 2 feet off the ground or 3 feet off the ground looking at something. And you might say that turkey's at 30 yards, but in an open field, he might be 45 yards. And luckily, our weapons probably allow for a little bit of that, but that's when birds get crippled. You'll see a lot of hunters, especially bow hunters, use their decoy as their range device. They know how far it is from where they're at. And if that bird is on this side or that side or here or there, that tells them it's 10 yards or 12 yards or 20 yards, which gives them some depth perception of when they can shoot or when they can draw their bow and get ready to launch that arrow. So you're using that decoy as kind of a depth gauge as well.
Yeah, I always, if I'm shotgun hunting, I typically set my decoys at 20 yards out, and I use just 20 paces. I do have a rangefinder, and I use it for when I'm bow hunting, but you don't have to have a rangefinder. Like say, you can step it off, and as long as you know what the distance is to your decoys, you're absolutely right. When that tom comes in and starts interacting, you know the exact range of that bird at that time.
That's a great game I used to play with young hunters, and my dad played with me too. And there's nothing else going on in the woods. he'd pick out a tree or he'd pick out a flower on the ground and say, how far is it? How far is it? And you just learn to practice those distances and judging. So a classic story that I tell, and I'm sorry for telling too many stories, but my first turkey I shot with an H&R single shot, modified barrel, 2 3/4 inch gun, which Matt has right there. I know he does.
Yep, it's the gun right. It's my first gun too.
Yep, a lot of us started that way, and the effective range on that gun for me was no more than 20 yards. And I used a 20 gauge shotgun for many, many years. It was critical to know the distance that gun was lethal at. And so I practiced continuously. And when I was hunting in New York one time, I had my shotgun out there, and I had this turkey coming and coming and coming. I had actually gone out and placed a stick at 20 yards in the ground because it was different kind of habitat. It was open maple timber. And so I stuck a stick in the ground, and I said, okay, when that turkey gets past that stick, I can shoot him. He'll be within 20 yards. And that turkey came up and literally stopped at 21 yards and strutted for about 20 minutes. And most people wouldn't have had the patience, but I told myself, no, I'm not going to shoot until he's on the other side of that stick. And the last thing that turkey did after 20 minutes of strutting at 21 yards was turn, look directly at me, and gobble. And I swear I could see his tonsils vibrating. And then he took one more step across that stick, and I shot him. And if I would have reached out a little farther than I thought I felt comfortable, my confidence would have went down, and I would have missed out on 20 minutes of hunting, and that turkey staring me straight in the face before he gobbled that last time. And so that self-confidence and reliability on your weapons and your woodsmanship skill, they all start to play a factor in what I'll call the success of turkey hunting. And again, success is not measured by putting a tag on your bird. It's the experiences that you have while you're out there.
One of the keys there, though, is knowing the effective range of your firearm, and that's where you're not being a responsible or ethical hunter unless you go out ahead of time, and you don't have to use these little higher price shoot and see targets, but you need to use something and try your shotgun at different ranges to make sure that you know what your reasonable range is with your firearm. You know, this one was at 15 yards.
Mm-hmm.
No, this is 25. This is actually 45 yards. And you know, I got my Mossberg 935. I thought it had a better range than that. I got some different shells, and they shoot differently, and I won't be shooting 45 yards because it wouldn't be ethical. 25 yards I don't have a problem with. But I know that because I went out and used those particular shells and checked it.
And we would always recommend that you pattern the gun you use every year. But one of the biggest mistakes is you'll get a buddy that says, hey, try my gun. Well, that's kind of like driving your Chevy all the time, and your buddy says, get in my Ferrari. You don't know where the turn signals are. You don't know where the headlights are at. You've got to know what you're driving, and you've got to have confidence in that gun.
The other thing is we part of the connecting individuals class that the NWTF has, we provide a 870 pump shotgun is what is the standard gun that we issue our new hunters if they don't have one. And I've had 3 hunters with full chokes, the identical guns sit next to each other, and all 3 guns patterned differently with the same ammunition. So you can't base it even off of the same particular model of gun. You need to take your specific shotgun with that specific box of shells that you're going to be hunting with, and pattern it and make sure what your effective range is.
And that all boils back to your confidence. Because when you're confident, when you pull that trigger, you're going to hit a bird at a certain distance in a certain way that it's going to be dead. You're going to feel good. But I've had those guys sit there going, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? If you're saying should I, shouldn't I, you probably shouldn't be. You've got to know when it's time to click that safety off and pull that trigger that you're going to have a dead turkey at the end, unless something really strange happens. And there's a split second when something really strange can happen. But it shouldn't be that, the last thing you want to think is, well, I'm just going to throw one out there and see if I hit him. And that's not what we're after. That's not how we're turkey hunting. Let him walk away and try to call him in tomorrow.
The other thing that I recommend is if you're going to go pattern, that you shoot that gun the way you're planning on hunting. And if you're going to be shotgun hunting, sitting in a low profile and in a low chair, I've got one of these little pads that actually clips on your leg to give you a spot for your gun to rest. I would take this with the shotgun, with the chair I'm going to be hunting from, and that's how I'd pattern my gun, because it'll shoot differently. You know, if you're sitting in a regular chair off of a stand-up shooting stick, that's way different than sitting a couple, you know, just a foot off the ground and shooting something off your leg. It's you want to put, and I'm also a fan of going ahead and putting your camo and your face mask and everything on, because the gloves you're using, everything that you're doing when you're hunting, you want to simulate that exact same thing when you're practicing. You know, when I practice with my bow, usually before the season starts, I'll set the blind up and I'll set myself up and I'll put my decoy, or I've got actually a turkey target, and I'll set it out. And there have been times when I've made adjustments in my blind, because when I went to shoot, I realized, hey, even though I can see from where I draw back where my peep sight is and the sight out front, the arrow's sitting several inches below. And when I've gone to shoot, it's like, holy cow, I could have actually hit the blind because it's enough lower. I can see clear to where that I'm shooting. But you want to make sure that, you know, that everything is exactly like it's going to be when you're hunting. You want to practice that same way.
Practice like you play. That's,
yep.
We've all learned that our whole lives. And if you're not prepared, you're not practicing. The game day should just be a reiteration of what you've practiced all along. And it's going to be a culmination of your confidence and your calling and your clothing. And as simple as being prepared to have your long underwear on. Because if you're out there and you're cold and you're wet, you're not going to be sitting still.
Yep.
And so all those things start to play on you.
Gloves can make a huge difference. I bought a pair of turkey hunting gloves years ago, and they're really silky, and I did not practice with them. And when I went out to hunt that morning, when I first wore them, it felt different. It was actually, I hated it because it's like I'm trying to get the safety. And I'm going through all this stuff in my mind. I put the gun up on my knee like I usually do, and you know the gloves that I recommend are the ones that have the little dimples on them, so you have some texture to them, so that you have a good firm grip on your firearm, because you don't want something that's sliding all over the place. So like I say, whatever it is you're going to be hunting in, I recommend using that when you go to pattern your gun and practice that way.
Yep, I agree, Matt. And I've seen that many times where somebody will put an extra pair of winter gloves on and then they can't get their safety off. Yep. Or they can't get their finger through their trigger guard because they're not used to it. You know, so you've got to be prepared for those little hiccups like that. One other thing I would like to add to being prepared, and this is just one of those woodsmanship skills that you need to practice, and you can practice this at home leaning against your wall. If you think you're sitting down, you know, against a tree or even in a blind in a chair, we tend to think of the turkey straight away from us, and that's where I want to be sitting at, because that bird's going to be coming right at me. Well, practice this. Put your gun up. If that turkey's straight ahead of you and you put your gun up, how easy is it to hold your gun straight ahead of you? It's almost impossible. If you're a right-handed hunter, you have very little mobility in front or to your side. Your mobility is to your left. And if you're a left-handed hunter, your mobility is to your right. So in many cases, I almost want to be quartered away from where I think that bird's coming from, because as a right-handed hunter, I can swing almost 180 degrees to my left, but I can't swing 10 inches to my right. And inevitably, you know which direction that turkey is going to end up coming from, the side you can't move to. And we don't make a swinging move on a turkey to try to shoot it like a pheasant. We want to have a nice, slow, methodical, where we can place that bead right on that turkey's neck and shoot. And that means that it has to be slow. You can't jerk. You jerk, that turkey's going to react. It's going to bounce and wobble, and you're not going to make a good, clean shot. So you got to practice sitting at that tree. And then you've got to practice. Matt brought up a point there, and he didn't even realize it. I hope you heard it. He goes, I got my gun on my knee. Try holding your 7.5-pound gun up for 30 seconds or a minute. You can't do it. So what we tend to do is have that buttstock up in our shoulder with our gun barrel forearm down on our knee. And as that bird's coming in, the last little movement we have to do is just raising that gun barrel up. Very minimal movement, and it's still going to give us some flexibility to the left or the right. You'll have to adjust depending on the type of call you're using, but what he's really saying to you is through experience, he's learned how to minimize his movements, how to be in a ready position so that he's not going to spook that bird. because that bird's going to be within 50 yards of you coming hard. And once he's fixated on you, you can't move. You think, oh, I can just move this gun up an inch and get it over here. I could count the number of turkeys on my hands and feet that I have scared in the last 35 yards because I thought I could move an extra inch, and you can't. They're going to see you.
Well,
So
gentlemen, I'm
practice
gonna,
those things.
yeah, great advice, Jim. I know that's a big learning curve I had early on. Is I got set up thinking it was going to come from one direction, and then I had to make the switch and spook the birds. So good advice. I do want to press on. We've got about 22 minutes or so left of our scheduled time. We still need to cover field dressing. So what happens after you've killed the bird? You've got it on the ground. We did get a question come in. You can hit on this real quick, Jim. What's a good score on a bird? And then get into kind of that field dressing and after the shot.
Yep. So I'm going to be very, very holistic here. A good score on a turkey is one that has a tag on it. I am not going to judge the turkey you shoot, and you're not going to judge the turkey I shoot as long as I had a good hunt. I'm not looking at beard length and spur length and weight, and there ain't anybody out there that can tell me they can judge that in a field and judge it accurately. So yeah, there's a mechanism to score a bird, but what we want is that bird that gives us the good show and gives us the good dance. That's the ultimate scorecard. And I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but to me, that's the reality. I don't shoot a deer because it's got big antlers. I shoot a deer because I scouted it, I patterned it, it came down the trail the right way, and I shot it. And everything lined up, the stars all lined up that day. So excellent stuff. I'm going to jump in and share my screen real quick, and we'll go to the cleaning part, because this is something people brought up a few years ago. We talk about hunting them and all the fun stuff, and then we never talk about cleaning them or how to cook them. And Jamie's going to jump on the cook a little bit, but I want to make a couple of quick jokes about cleaning a wild bird. This came from a seminar I did a few years ago for some naturalists. They wanted me to show them how to clean game. And I went and did that. And then at the end, I said, I know the first question you're going to ask me is, what's the right way? You know, and I just got done giving them a 20-minute presentation on how to clean it. And their first question was going to be, how's the right way? Well, the right way is, at the end of cleaning, you must end up with a pile of stuff you would eat and a pile of stuff you would not eat. And how you get there is up to you. Okay? So there are ways that I've been taught to clean. There's ways I've learned to clean. It's very much a preferential thing on how people have taught you. But the commonality is we all end up with stuff we would eat and stuff we wouldn't eat. And so how you get there and how messy that process is going to be up to you. When it comes to turkey cleaning, there's really two methodologies, and it kind of ends up with what you want to end up with your final product. I grew up plucking birds. We usually cooked our turkey at Thanksgiving, and there's nothing like having that whole bird like that on the platter. You're going to cook it as a big presentation piece. You're going to show off to your friends and family at Thanksgiving or Easter time that this is the whole bird. And that bird has skin on it. So the way to do that is to pluck the feathers off of it. So there's two ways. We'll talk about plucking in a minute. It's the dry method and the wet method. And then the other option is skinning the bird, which is probably the simplest thing to do. It is probably the way to do it if you're not planning on using the bird as a presentation piece. You want to cook it on the grill or do other things with the meat. We're just going to simply cut the skin and peel all the skin off, and the feathers are going to come with it. This would be very similar than if you went to town and bought a whole chicken. You could buy it with the skin on or the skin off. Well, most times it's going to come with the skin on, but we're going to learn how to quarter that bird and cut it up or take the skin off if we want to do something else with it. So wet plucking is really a unique style of doing it. In this case, I'm showing a turkey fryer, but in that we're going to be heating the water up in there. You can use hot tap water or even boil your water. It's just got to be really warm, not boiling hot, but it's going to be hot enough that by the time you get it outside, it still retains its heat. You're going to take the turkey by the legs, dip it in the water, get it completely submerged, and then move it up and down a few times like a plunger to get that water to go in underneath the feathers and next to the skin. What that's going to do is loosen up the grip of that feather follicle on the skin itself. And then when you pull it out of the water, it's basically kind of parboiling or quick scorching the outside. You'll be able to take your hands and grab those feathers and pull them off in handfuls. And when you're done, you're going to have a bird that has the skin on it. What's the reason for leaving the skin on? Turkeys don't have much fat, and these birds tend to be older. The birds we buy at town are actually birds less than 6 months old or even 3 months old. They've got a lot of fat in them, so they're much juicier. When we cook a wild turkey with the skin on, we're helping retain as much moisture as we can, because the number one fault of turkeys, wild turkeys, is they're too dry. So we use that skin to help keep that moisture in so we don't dry that bird out. And then once all the feathers are off, basically your bird is finished. Now you're going to start to do the finishing touches of taking the legs off, taking the head off, in many cases taking the guts out. You may not have gutted the bird or taken the intestines and stuff out yet. You can certainly do that at any point. I like to pluck my turkey first because then it's just not as much a mess with the blood and the other issues. Dry plucking is a much more methodical process. If you don't have the hot water, you can pluck your turkey dry, but that just means literally you almost have to pick it one feather at a time. It takes quite a while to do, and you want to be careful because you haven't loosened that follicle up, and if you pull the feather the wrong direction from the feather tract, it'll tear the skin. And once you tear the skin, then you risk the fact of allowing that bird to dry out a little bit more, or maybe not looking as nice when you cook it. A couple of things to be careful of when you do dry pluck is I live in town, and when I dry pluck in town, there are feathers floating everywhere. They're in my neighbor's yard. They're in my garage. I can't control them. Now, it's nice for the birds nesting in my nesting boxes because they'll pick up the feathers and use them. But from a standpoint, it looks like somebody ran over a turkey through a fence in my front yard. And so I'm kind of cautious with my neighbors of how I do that. And then the thing that probably gets most people the most EBGBs is that when you dry pluck a turkey, it's going to have ticks and lice on it. And when that bird starts to cool down, those ticks and lice are going to look for another warm body to try to attach to. So you're going to get a lot of lice on you, and they're going to itch, and it's going to make you feel a little bit like you need to run inside and take a shower. So nothing wrong with dry plucking. It just takes a lot longer to do. And in my mind, it's a little harder to do. Skinning is the easiest thing to do. You're simply usually going to take your knife, pierce the outer skin, then stick your fingers in and pull away from each other. And that's just going to allow the skin to come off, and all the feathers are going to be attached to the skin. A lot of times I'll skin a bird if I've already shot one bird and I have my Thanksgiving bird and the other one I want to use to cook on the grill or something, but I'm not going to cook a whole bird at once. Once that bird's skin, it's just like a chicken at town. I'm going to cut the thighs off, separate the legs out, maybe even half the breast, do something different with it so I can cook it in different recipes at different times. One thing that people forget about too is that when we talk about turkey tenders, there really is a tenderloin to poultry. Underneath that breast muscle is a much thinner strip of meat, and it's called the tender. That is a really good piece of meat. So when you're breasting out that turkey, if it's been skinned, be careful not to lose that piece of turkey tender. And don't throw the thighs away. Don't throw the legs away. That is terrible waste. That is a lot of meat. There's some great ways to cook those pieces of meat. But we obviously like that big breast piece because that's kind of the showpiece of the wild turkey. One thing I always like to bring up to, and it's hard to do it here, but there's something called the breast sponge. And that's actually fat that grows in around the neck of the wild turkey on the male that we're shooting. He's building up all this fat because when he's breeding, he's burning a lot of calories, and he may not be spending the same amount of time eating every day. So he's losing weight all the time. So he's living off of that breast sponge. The best way to describe breast sponge is it looks like snot. It's slimy and you can't hang on to it, and it's slippery and it's hard to cut off. But we need to remove that breast sponge before we think about cooking that bird. And you need to spend a lot of extra time working on that. You'll see it, you'll know it, what it is when you see it. So take the time. It's not muscle tissue. You can tell the difference. Make sure you get that breast sponge removed. And then, I'll just leave it with that. I'll just stop sharing. If we got any questions about cleaning or how I clean or how Matt cleans. And then Jamie's got some cooking, I think, for us. And I don't know if we have a way to look at questions. One thing I would say about any wild game, it's always best to remove the insides as fast as you can or cool that bird down as fast as you can. That seems to make the meat better. But in all honesty, I've had many days where I've shot a turkey in the morning. I go to work the rest of the day. I keep the turkey cool, either in the shade or I might put it in with some ice or something, but not field dress it. Just keep it as a whole bird. And it could be as much as 8 or 10 hours later before I get that bird taken care of. That doesn't ruin the meat. What usually ends up being the worst thing is the gases that are in the intestines will start to expand because of the bacterial growth. And so it'll be a lot stinkier when I clean it, but it really hasn't affected the meat because, again, I'm shooting the head. So I'm not introducing any bad bacteria into the meat or things itself that way. So don't feel like you shoot a turkey and the first thing you have to do is gut it or field dress it like you do a deer, because what you're really going to do is create a big mess for yourself. The feathers are going to get full of blood, or you got to transport it out with a lot of blood on it. You've got plenty of time to gut that bird out. You got your grease going there, Jamie?
I do, Jim. Can you all hear me okay?
We're having a hard time hearing you. Not real well.
Okay, let me make a change here. How about now?
Better?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I got the grease going. Just in terms of your food safety rules, it's going to be pretty similar to any of your other poultry.
No, we're losing you completely, Jamie.
Gotcha. Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mute this computer and switch over to my other computer and use audio there. Let's try that. How about now? Can you hear me?
Perfectly. Yep.
All right. I'm going to try to excellent. Now I can hear you all. I had to switch over there, so you all can hear me good now. Yeah, so I got my oil going. And the big concern that we always want to make sure of is just that we're being safe with any of our oils, especially, once we leave the field. We want to make sure that when we get home, the breast has been properly cut up and stored. Vacuum sealers are absolutely the best way to seal all the oxygen and get all of that out, and get the air out before you package it to put it in the freezer. So those are worth their weight in gold to preserve your food. But once you get that turkey breast out, there's a lot of things you can do with it. And I know Jim and Matt and Grant too probably have some other recipes that we can share your way. But what I'm going to share with you here in the next few minutes is a recipe that come my way. We were doing one of these classes about 4 or 5 years ago and had some pro staffers from a fairly reputable camo company come out and do a demonstration on this. And it's just absolutely one of my favorite recipes. Being from the South, if you can fry it, that's the way to do it, right? So I'm going to use my camera here and walk you all through a few things. But you basically start out by taking your breasts, getting all that trimming off, and you want to cut them into about 1-inch cubes. I'll hold this out here. I've just got some of them there in a Ziploc bag. Just 1-inch cubes, regularly sliced, and just, do a real good job. This is basically a turkey nugget recipe. So yeah, 1-inch cubes, make sure all your trimming and stuff's been done. And then once you've got your meat trimmed up, it's cubed up, you're going to take it and put it in a bag of good old fashioned buttermilk, right? Buttermilk does a couple of things. It allows the batter to bind really well to the nugget itself, to the meat. And then it also sometimes will remove some of that gamey flavor. Now, wild turkey to me has not really ever had a super strong game taste to me, but maybe that's because I enjoy eating it so much. But yeah, you're going to take it, add it to buttermilk. It's going to soak in your freezer or fridge overnight. And then you'll be ready to take those nuggets and drop them into your bowl, which I've got here. I've already got some that have been battered up. And so the seasoning is a mixture of flour, pepper. You can add some paprika. You can add some cayenne pepper if you like it hot. It's got sage. It's got a lot of great ingredients in it. We're going to be sending that recipe your all's way in the follow-up email next week. And then if you'll notice here on my grease, on my burner, I've got the temperature set to about 375. That's good and plenty hot to do the job. If you get too hot than that, you're going to start burning your oil. You're going to have a smell, and it's going to cook your batter really, really quick, and it won't do as thorough of a job. So you want to make sure you got your heat set to the right setting. And then you can start dropping those in, and I'll demonstrate this. And Jim, if you or Matt want to jump in a little bit while these are cooking and share any other advice, that'd be great. Or any other questions that you all have, keep them coming.
One of my favorite recipes is taking teriyaki and soy sauce, 1 part each, in a bag, and you cube the turkey up just like Jamie did, but you marinate those chunks in teriyaki and soy sauce, and then wrap them in bacon, hold them with a toothpick, and put them on the grill. It's phenomenal. Anything wrapped in bacon tastes good, but
what I would add to what Jamie and Matt are both doing is I showed you the picture of the traditional turkey, which, you know, is how we think of it. But again, the way they're cooking in little chunks and pieces, or the bacon on the grill, to me, that talks about having friends over and social. And so when you start talking about having these little nuggets and these little appetizer type things, that means people are going to be standing around and telling stories and remembering hunts and doing things. And that's a great way to talk about it, because now you're actually eating the bird and you're telling the story about how everything happened. And that just adds a little bit more of that circle to it, more so than the relatives that don't hunt that come over to eat your turkey and they just complain because it's too dry. You know, a hunter will understand that, and the hunters have eaten good stuff and bad stuff. I always like to reiterate too, is if you are lucky enough to hunt with some friends and you're not sure how to cook those legs, cut those legs off separately, keep them. If you get 2 turkeys a year, let's just plan on getting 1 turkey. You get 1 turkey, that's 2 legs. But if you got 2 or 3 buddies and that's 4 or 8 legs, come over on a Saturday and smoke them and have smoked turkey legs. You know, and sit around and gnaw on those while you're watching a football game in December or something. And so again, make a day out of that recipe and working with it. And the thigh meat, wonderful for stir fry. You know, great that way. Or if you want to make some kind of a chicken salad, sometimes you use the breast meat for that. And you got to realize breasts are pretty big pieces of meat. My family's starting to get smaller now as my kids have grown up, and I'll take a breast and quarter it out so that when I cook it for my wife and myself, you know, it's enough for 2 of us. Instead of cooking a half a bird, we're going to take that bird and make 6 or 8 meals out of it instead of 1 meal that we have a lot of leftovers with. So, and then a good old traditional favorite is you take that thigh meat and cut the bone out of it, put it between 2 pieces of plastic and beat it to about 1/4 of an inch. And then roll it in flour and stir, or a chicken fry it, and make yourself a turkey tenderloin, you know, with a big piece of lettuce and tomato on there on a fresh bun. That's a simple sandwich right there. So a million things you can do with turkeys.
Absolutely. And you know, Jim, I love the fact that you touched on the social aspect. Like that, to me, that's how your season keeps on going, right? I mean, you take a deer or a turkey and it's several months later and you've got friends over, and suddenly you're back in the woods, you're sitting in your tree stand or in your blind, and you know, you're telling the story of maybe how that bird ended up on people's plates that evening. And it really does a cool job of connecting everything. So after these nuggets have gotten good and brown, just dip them out of the hot peanut oil here. and they're absolutely tasty. I know Jim and Matt both have tried these before. They're a great recipe. Again, it'll be coming to your all's inbox next week. But anytime you're around hot cooking oil, you got to be absolutely careful to make sure that you don't cause a bigger issue. So
yeah, especially if you're cooking inside. If deep fried whole turkey is a great way to cook it as well, but that takes practice in itself. And the number one issue is that we put too much oil in. We put the bird in, we forget about displacement. The oil goes over the top of the burner right onto the flame, and now you've got a fire. And if you're in a garage, you're probably going to burn your garage down. So we've got to be cautious. A couple other quick questions we've got here, Jamie, while you're frying. Dan said turkey chili is awesome. Absolutely, especially a white chili. White chili is good with poultry, and turkey makes it great. So I love it that way. I've seen people make turkey sausage and stuff. Tom's asking about using your cooking oil. The one thing that I would not recommend is that you use cooking oil that you fried fish in to fry your turkey in, because it's going to taste fishy. And I use canola oil or peanut oil a lot, but you can reuse it. It's like anything else. You treat it right. You keep it, you keep it cool, and you strain it. Because that flour that Jamie's using, it's going to fall off and fry and get burnt bits in the bottom. Run it through the cheesecloth, and you can use it many times over and over. But once you cook fish in it, I would save that oil for just frying fish in. And then there was one last question there I think Grant answered. It was more of a habitat question about hunting turkeys, especially in backwaters. That's where your scouting comes in, is knowing your terrain and knowing where the obstacles are. The funny thing about turkeys is there's times where if they don't want to come, they're not going to come. And if you're hunting a new area, it can be as simple as a fence that you don't know that's there, or a creek that they don't want to come across. If you're hunting flooded land they don't want to come through, you've got to know your terrain. And before we end here, we're getting real close, and man, Jamie's making me hungry. The last advice I'm going to give to everybody is the advice my dad gave to me. And it's that turkey hunting's easy. It really is. We make it much more complicated than it is. The way to kill a turkey is get between where he is and where he wants to go. And if you can do that, you're going to be successful. So just remember, you got to know your terrain, and you got to get between where the turkey is and where he wants to go, and you'll be okay.
One of the most important things about that, Jim, is if you know where they're roosting, if you roost a bird the night before and you go that morning and you're calling to them and they don't come your direction, chances are that bird's going to want to go back in that same general vicinity to roost that night. So late afternoon's a great time to be setting up somewhere near that roost tree. And if you know what direction he went, there's a good possibility he's going to come back from that same direction when it comes to roost. So that's just placing yourself, like I said, between where he is and where he wants to be.
And then you don't even have to call. You just wait on him to come walking by. Yeah.
Good stuff, gentlemen. Again, really appreciate you all tonight. Grant and Matt and Jim, you all are just absolutely great at this. And I know I learned a bunch too myself. A couple of things to just kind of wrap up with. We do want to let you all know of an opportunity coming up here in just a couple of weeks, actually. I believe it's April 10th. We've got some folks within our Hunter Ed shop and some of our partner groups out there. They're going to be putting together a class over in DeWitt. It's going to be 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. At the Wapsie Valley Ikes League there in DeWitt. It's going to be an intro to turkey workshop. It's going to probably cover a lot of the same materials that we covered here, but it's going to be an in-person event. The cost is $50. Lunch is going to be provided, and participants will be getting some awesome gear from Mossy Oak and the Iowa DNR. So to register for that, we'll put it in the chat feature. I believe it's already in tonight's chat feature. You can contact Rachel Alice at dnr.iowa.gov. Again, that's Rachel.Alice, ALLISS, at dnr.iowa.gov. There'll be some more information coming about that class in the follow-up email to come to your inboxes later this week. So again, thanks to our panelists tonight. Thanks to the NWTF. Thanks to the Iowa DNR for putting together this. Really appreciate you all and the time you all took to share your passion and your energy with everybody tonight. So again, thanks everyone for tuning in from home. We'll catch you next time.
You're off.
Like it shut